Of life's battles today. The battle of the bunk, the battle of the blab, and the battle of the bulge. Now they're very real battles. They're battles that are being fought daily. You're fighting some of them now, and the rest of your life you're going to be fighting these battles. Who is the King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. He can help us in our battles. O God the Lord, the strength of my salvation, thou hast covered my head in the day of battle. David rose up early in the morning, left the sheep with the keeper, and took and went as Jesse had commanded him, and he came to the trench as the host was going forth to the fight, and shouted for the battle. And Israel and the Philistines had put the battle in array, army against army. There's always a conflict in battle. If the trumpet give an uncertain sound, who's going to prepare himself for the battle? If the trumpet does give just an uncertain sound, doesn't mean that much, does it? But if it blows a certain sound, then you know something's going on. And you know to get ready, because there's going to be a conflict. They tell me that life is a battle of wits. Just think of all the poor folk who fight it unarmed. No wits. 49 BC, Julius Caesar and his victorious legions from Gaul had just been ordered by Pompey to disband. And as Caesar was approaching the Rubicon River, he was deep in thought and meditation. And then he said, if I don't pass this river immediately, it will be the beginning of all misfortune. The die is cast. And history tells us that they not only crossed the Rubicon, but they burned the bridges after they had crossed the Rubicon, and they went on to victory. Well, I want to talk to you in the area of these three battles, key battles. And I'd like to involve in those battles the areas of discipline, of determination, and also of diligence. Now, most people in their lives seek the course of least resistance. That's the same that water does, and it's usually downhill. And your life would be that same way if that's all you're doing. The wise man wrote and said, I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong. Someone wrote a song about that. But he that endureth to the end, they're the ones that are going to be saved. It's important what kind of a start you make, and it's important that you maintain out in the regular course of life. But it's the end that's so important. Getting to the finish line, getting to the end of it. And so there's some things that we're going to have to be aware of. Some real training that God's going to incorporate into our lives that's going to teach us discipline, the determination, the diligence. It's going to teach us self-control, and it's going to teach us orderliness and efficiency. And it's going to teach us character. And it's going to build into us not only the acceptance, but also the submission to authority. Let me remind you of, or illustrate to you out of my own life, a little incident that happened when I was just a little shaver, about the basic attitude of we humans to authority. When I was born, my dad was in the Army. He came home some months after, and of course I didn't know it yet. But naturally, as I grew up for the first 3 years of my life, and my dad being in the Army, I was used to the military talk, and most of the things that he talked about was what happened at the base that day and so forth. And evidently the thing that stuck in this little boy's mind was my dad being a private. It seemed like everybody was telling him what to do. I don't remember making this statement, but my folks still remind me of it and tease me of it. And they said one day when I was about 3 years of age, they had just corrected me for something and had disciplined me. And I muttered to them, I said, when I get in the Army, nobody's going to sass me. And that's just a little bit of the basic attitude of most of us. We don't want to be sassed, we don't want to be bossed, we don't want to be disciplined. But if we're going to be in the army of the Lord, we must be. We must be. If we're going to have the basic qualities of a Christian character, one of those is humility. That's submissiveness to authority. The first one I'd like for you to think about with me, and you can go ahead and turn to the book of Proverbs. Many of the scriptures that we're going to be referring to today will be taken from the book of Proverbs. When I think of the battle of the bunk, that's the battle of the bed. Oh, so many people have a battle disciplining themselves to get up. I well remember dear old Brother Marsh and some of the other former GBS students of a few years ago would well remember dear old Brother Marsh and how that he liked to get a hold of some of those juicy statements in the book of Proverbs. And this was one of them, where he would say, yet a little sleep. This is Proverbs 6 and verses 10 and 11. Yet a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep, so shall thy poverty come. So shall thy poverty come, he would reiterate. And then one of his favorite illustrations, I suppose if I heard it once, I heard it probably 12 times. And he said, there was a young man who came here to school. And he said, one of the requirements that I made of my students was that they spend so much time on their lessons. And he said, this young man, he said, when I asked him how much time he had spent on his lessons, he said he would tell me every day. He would recite in class. He would tell me how much time he had spent on his lessons, but he was making absolutely miserable grades. So he said, one day I asked him, said, how do you spend all this time on your lessons and you don't learn? And finally then the boy confessed that he had been putting the books on the chair and sitting on the books on the chair while he lay his head over on the desk and took a nap. And so if he took a 2-hour nap, then he said, I spent 2 hours on my lessons. But you see, though he put some time in on his lessons, on test day, he had nothing to show for it. A little sleep, a little folding of the hands, so shall thy poverty come on grade day, Brother Marsh would say. You know, there's a grade day that's coming for all of us. I remember a boy that was there in school, and poor old John, he loved to sleep. He just couldn't get up. He couldn't get up for breakfast. He couldn't get up for his 7 o'clock class. He couldn't get up for anything. He said, Gary said, I've got an alarm clock, I've got a clock radio, and he said, they go off, but he said, they just don't wake me up. So he stopped by my room one evening, and he lived on down the hall on the other side of the building, really, and he said, would you please come get me up in the morning? And I said, John, if you really mean business, you really want to get up, I said, I'll get you up. He said, what are you going to do? I said, I'll tell you what. I said, I'll call you 3 times. And I said, after I've called you the 3rd time, I said, I'll go ahead and get you up real good then. I said, I'll have a glass of water for you. Oh, he said, I'll wake up. The next morning, I was to get him up at 5:30, and so I got up and I was dressed and I made my way down the hall and over to John's room. And as I approached his room, Sure enough, his alarm was going off. The clock radio was going off. Some music was playing. La, 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 la. I went over and I opened the door. The alarm. Music just a blaring. And I walked over close to the bed and I said, John. Nothing. John. Nothing. John, wake up. Nothing. So I went and got a glass of water. Took me a while to go get it. I came back. The alarm's still going. Brrr. Radio still blaring. I called him another time. Gave him an extra call. That time, he still didn't answer. So I just unceremoniously, I just doused him real good. He come up out of there. Oh, he was frightened at it and a bit upset too. So I fled for my own betterment and went on down to back to my room. All that day he was a little touchy around me. The next night, that same night, he came and he said, hey, he said, I'm glad I got up this morning. He said, would you wake me up again in the morning? I said, sure, John, be glad to. I said, same deal. He said, 3 calls. He said, I'm going to set my clock and my radio this time. I said, you had them on this morning. Well, he said, I'll get them this time. I said, all right. 5:30 the next morning, when I approached his room, you could hear the alarm clock, brrr, radio blaring. Open the door, sleeping away. Walked over, John, John, oh, I'm getting up. And he hopped right up out of there. Well, after a period of days, and I guess a couple of weeks maybe, John finally got disciplined to where if he had a test or something that he just had to study for, he might get up. But you know, I watched John. He washed out after 1 year at Bible school, and he went out. Some years ago, I held a meeting in a church that he was attending in the northern part of the state of Ohio. You know, I was sad and disheartened to see that John had never won the battle of the bunk when he was in Bible school. And as a grown man out making a living now, he's still fighting every day the battle of the bunk. I remember another boy that was in Bible school. I believe this one was while Brother Thornton was there also. And poor old Eugene, whenever he was in victory, oh, how he loved Jesus. And you know, you just couldn't even go to the dining hall hardly. But what he'd be tapping on the table with the salt shaker, that was the custom when you wanted to testify. That meant everyone get quiet. Someone couldn't eat but what they had to testify, and so he would testify. You know, he'd do that all during revival, the opening school revival, and then the second semester revival. He could really do well, but in between times, he would not discipline himself. And time after time, I've gone into the 7 o'clock class, and sometimes even to later classes, and one of the teachers would say, where is Eugene? Eugene nowhere to be found. Would somebody go to the men's dorm and would you please wake Eugene up? Do you know, finally they sent Eugene home from school. He never could win the battle of the bunk. He was just a lazy bones. Our society is full of lazy bones because we don't like discipline. You remember the little story of the little red hen? She was going to plant some things. She wanted some help tilling up the soil, but the horse wouldn't help, and the pig wouldn't help, and no one would help her. So she went out and she did it herself. She asked for some help to plant, but no one would help her plant. And every time she wanted help, no one would help. Even when it came to the time of the harvest, no one would help, so she harvested it herself. When it came time to grind it, no one would help her grind it. But when she had it all baked and ready to eat, oh, the horse was ready to eat, the pig was ready to eat, the cow was ready to eat. They were all ready then to partake of her labors. She said, oh no, You didn't help me plow, and you didn't help me sow, and you didn't help me harvest, and you didn't help me grind, and so I'll just eat it by myself too. That's a tremendous principle that used to be instilled and ingrained in young people through the old McGuffey's Reader. But that principle has been taken out of our society, and it's been replaced by get everything you can by doing as little as possible. And this has permeated our entire society. Now, this may not be real spiritual talk right now, but it's still good talk for you. You know, I remember a fellow I told you about, Marty at Sears and Roebuck. I'm thinking about a fellow over here in Ohio that worked at Fisher Body now. And that fellow just enjoyed doing nothing. He went in, and for 8 hours he sat and ran a press. He read a book, he told me, for the entire 8 hours. He said, I pushed a button to start that press that was stamping out fenders and sometimes hoods and so forth, whatever it was running that particular day. He said, I push a button. And he said, when I push that button, there's somebody else that's supposed to have a big row of steel on that, and it's supposed to, somebody else fastens it on over here on the other side of the press, and all my job is to push that button and take it through there. Now, this has been about 12, 13 years ago, something like that, and clear back then he was making, I think it was $9 or $10 an hour for pushing that button and then sitting there and reading a book for 8 hours. It wasn't too long they struck. They were needing more money to push those buttons. And so while they were on strike, he signed up for food stamps, and he was still getting, in his unemployment, he was still getting almost $250 a week. And he went in and unashamed, unembarrassed, signed up for those food stamps, and he said, with counting this and the food stamps and with my unemployment, he said, I'm getting within just a few dollars of what I would make if I was working 40 hours this week. And he said, I just enjoy staying at home reading the book rather than having to go over there to Fisher Body and read the book. And he said, I just think this is great. But I don't care whether it's Fisher Body, Sears and Roebuck, General Motors, or the company you work for, they can't stay in business unless they're making a profit. And with our philosophy now of get everything you can for as little as possible, and that's one of the reasons that our economy is being devastated just like it is. Now let's take it over into another vein where we're perhaps a little bit more familiar. Churches want producing pastors. And when they get ready to call a pastor, well, what kind of a caller is he? What kind of a preacher is he? And what have his past churches done under his leadership? And then the pastors, they kind of look at the churches that are open, and the pastor wants a producing church. Well, how much do they pay, and what kind of a parsonage is there, and what kind of benefits do they have, and on and on. But friends, a church will not produce in itself, and neither can a pastor produce in himself. It takes all of us doing our dead level best to produce in this day and age that we live. And then we're going to have to kick ourselves out of the bunk, out of this, and get to where that we're willing to roll our sleeves up and get involved and really do something for the Lord. In this same 6th chapter of Proverbs, it says, "Go to the ant, thou sluggard. Go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways and get smart. Be wise. Which, having no guide, overseer, or ruler, no one to tell her what to do, provideth her meat in the summer and gathereth her food in the harvest. How long wilt thou sleep, O sluggard? When wilt thou arise out of thy sleep?" Even the ant. And you and I, as we've walked across these grounds, have probably tramped on several of them without even knowing it. Every once in a while we'll stop and we'll look down and we'll see a little ant struggling with a little crumb, and when they come to a crack, how interesting it is to watch them as they work and as they labor and as they're just diligent. They're busy. They're doing something. And the wise man says, you go to the ant and just watch a colony of ants. Sometimes you don't even have to watch a colony. You've just watched one. And you'll see that discipline. No one's telling them to work. They just know that they need to. You're all getting so blessed, I'm going to have to hurry up and get off of this before someone hurts themselves demonstrating. The soul of the sluggard, the wise man tells us in the 13th proverb, 13th chapter, 4th verse, the soul of the sluggard desireth and hath nothing, but the soul of the diligent shall be made fat. Or in the 22nd proverb, seest thou a man diligent in his business, he shall stand before kings. And the 26th proverb records this, as the door turneth upon his hinges, so doth the slothful upon his bed. The slothful hideth his hand in his bosom, it grieveth him to bring it again to his mouth. The sluggard is wiser in his own conceit than 7 men can render a reason. Let's think just a little bit about the battle of the blab. And you know, so many just plain talk too much. Time there was a man driving his team down the road. Back in those days, he had his wagon. He was on his way to town. He had a nosy neighbor down the road, and he had to pass her house in order to get to town. And he was just sick and tired because every time she'd hear a wagon coming, she'd always hurry out and be sitting on the porch. Kind of an elevated porch, and she could sit out there and she could see not only who was going to town and who wasn't, but she could even see the contents of the wagon, whether they were taking something to town to sell, and if they were coming back from town, she could see what they'd bought. He just had enough of it. Because just everyone knew that as soon as she found out, she'd be telling this one and she'd be telling that one. She was just a community busybody. This one day he had just had it. He got just almost to her porch. Whoa, whoa! He reined his horse up, and sure enough, she was sitting right there close to the roadway, sitting on her porch. And they looked at her and they said, "If you'll pull your nose in," said, "we'll go on down the road." She just talked too much. Now, James made the statement in his 2nd chapter that if any man among you seems to be religious, but he cannot bridle his tongue, then that man's religion is vain. Now that really puts it down where we can all understand that. Regardless of your testimony, regardless of every other area of your life, if you can't handle your tongue, if you can't bridle and discipline and keep your tongue still, then all the rest that you're doing is vain. All the rest is vain. Someone said that the mouth is the dentist's fortune and it's the fool's trap. Just running it too much. They say the difference between the parrot and the human is that the parrot's willing to tell it like it is, and the human has to add a little bit to it. He that keepeth his mouth, in the 13th Proverbs, the 3rd verse, he that keepeth his mouth keepeth his life. The 14th proverb, the simple believeth every word. In all labor there's profit, but the talk of the lips tendeth only to penury. The 18th proverb, a fool's mouth is his destruction, and his lips are the snare of his soul. And the words of a talebearer are as wounds. They go down into the innermost, the chambers, that is, of the belly. Learn to keep your mouth shut, even as some things are true. I'm thinking one time of a pastor who was called over to a home. And he had one of his close friends in the parish, one of his members, he had him with him. A lady had just recently undergone a very traumatic event. Her husband had been killed in a grinding automobile accident. They had not been saved too long. They were walking with the Lord, and God was blessing them. But the heartache and the agony of having lost her husband, they were both just recently saved in our church. She called her pastor over. She wanted to unburden. And she unburdened to him. The pastor had left the member out in the car, of course. And she gave to him in confidence some of the bad things of her past. some sins that had come up before her and were troubling her, with her husband being dead and gone now, and it was troubling her that she was with child when they had gotten married, and she felt that she needed to confess this to her pastor and see if she needed just where she was, and could her husband have been saved, and on and on. I mean, from the very depths of her soul, she had poured out her heart to her pastor in confidence. And her pastor prayed with her and left. And he had not been in the car with that other man, a member of his church, until he had divulged everything that woman had just confided in him. That is a horrible sin for a pastor to commit. To break someone's confidence when they have confided and poured out their heart, their trouble, their woe, and then for you to carelessly. Now, everything that the pastor said was true. It was true. He didn't bear any false witness. It was true. And young people, there's going to be things that you're going to come into contact with that they never need to be repeated again. There are some things that, even though I haven't been pastoring that long, that people have confided in me. My family doesn't know. My wife doesn't know. They will literally die with me. And that's the way that it ought to be. Besides, when you feel like talking so much, why is it that you want to say that? The proverb writer says that where there's no wood, the fire goeth out. So where there is no talebearer, or that word means whisperer, the strife ceaseth. Isn't that an insight into why we can have so much strife in a family or in a church? The talebearers, the whisperers that just can continue to carry on. I say again, even if it is true, what good is it doing you to relate it? What good is it doing the one that you're conveying it to? Does it edify them spiritually? Does it build them up in the faith? Does it encourage them? In the Battle of the Bulge, we'll probably cover several different things, because I looked this crowd over and the majority of you are young. And so you're not too much worried about the bulge yet. But you know, so often we can preach against alcohol. We can preach against tobacco. We can preach against many, many different things, but my Bible teaches me that you can be a glutton also, and that it's just as wrong to overindulge in that area as it is in other areas. Amen, Brother Brugger. That's good preaching. Thank you. I thought maybe you were all asleep, but I see that you're not. Maybe I ought to quicken you up a little bit with the definition of the middle age spread. They say that's when the lady still has the hourglass figure, but all the sand's gone to the bottom. Well, some of you didn't catch that either. You're sleepier than I thought you were. The desire accomplished is sweet to the soul. Oh, to learn discipline in this area. You know, it's interesting, all the diets that are on sale in America today. All the diets that are on sale. There's a fellow that lives not too far from me, and that man is in the National Guard. Wasn't too long ago, I think a year ago, he got troubled about his own weight and wanted to do something about it, and it wasn't too long. He just did not have the discipline. He just kept eating, so he didn't lose any weight. Finally, his commanding officer came to him and said, "All right, Rob, now we're going to terminate you. We're going to relieve you of duty. You're going to lose your job unless you lose 100 pounds. And they set a time limit for him to do it. They weren't playing with him. Hey, he really got busy. You know, he went out to this particular place, and he went in and he enrolled, and he said, "I don't care what it costs me, I've got to lose weight or I'm going to lose my job." He didn't have the discipline, so he was willing to pay for someone else to discipline him. So they set him down and they said, all right, now it's going to cost you $600 to join. And after you join for $600, then it's going to cost you between $60 and $90 a week to eat the special foods that we dictate that you eat. Now I'm here to tell you that when somebody else disciplined him, someone else gave him a reason to be disciplined. Do you know he's got a hold of himself, and he hasn't lost all of the 100 pounds yet, but he's lost a great deal of it? And yet he could have saved himself literally thousands of dollars by this time if he would have just disciplined himself and learned to push back from the table. You see why discipline's such a nasty thing? Discipline is that'll not only help us in this area to have self-control, but discipline will also teach us to get up and to take our time with the Word of God and with our praying, our relationship with the Lord. Discipline is so good for us in so many different areas of our life. But this is an undisciplined age. This is an age where that we want our way more than we want anything else. Let me talk to you for just a moment about our manners. Here's another area that it just takes some discipline. I've seen some very ill-mannered boys on the campgrounds. You know, I'm not really from another generation. I just sound like it. I'm not really that much older than you all are. I just look like it. But you know, it's still good manners to open a door for a lady. It's still proper to treat our lady folk as ladies, to open the car door for them, to treat them with respect. It's still proper. It's still good manners. Well, we're thinking about manners and so forth. Let's just go ahead and kill the service. Manners are the noises you don't make while you're eating. The noises you don't make. No one wants to see your grinding mill in operation. Learn to chew with your mouth closed. I entertained an evangelist in my home one time, and I was embarrassed to death. I've been working with my children and so forth, and then this evangelist came, and you know, our children have been taught that you take a bite of food and then you chew it. You don't talk while you have food in your mouth. You chew with your mouth closed. And the dear evangelist came, a good brother, a wonderful preacher in the pulpit. And I love him, but even to this day, I don't enjoy eating with him. He gets right down next to the business at hand. He just shovels it in. And all the time he's yeah, brother, look at that. And just no manners. Why? And my little boy, you know, he's like some of your little boys. He just doesn't have any more sense than to tell it like it is. And the brother started eating the first time. And my little boy, he was just a little over 3 years old, and he said, "Dad, you see brother saw," he mentioned his name, right there at the table. "You see how he eats?" I said, "Yes, son, that's the way I've been telling you not to eat." Sure, it embarrassed me, but you know, I'd rather have my boy know how to eat. And you know, the napkins that are over there around the silverware, they're not just there to hold the knife and the fork and the spoon together till you get to the table. Those napkins are to be used. And it's proper for you when you sit down and after you've returned thanks for your food and you unwrap your silverware, it's proper for you to put that napkin on your lap. We learned kind of an interesting way to enforce that with our children. We made a little game out of it that whenever we went to the table, if anyone started to eat and they didn't have the napkin on their lap, they had to go to their room and count to 25. Well, a few trips, they soon learned. They just delight in trying to catch Grandma or Grandpa when they're visiting, making a a misstep and forgetting to use their napkin, but it makes it important. Now, I say that's not too religious, but it's still good manners, and it will enhance other areas of our Christian walk to make us a Christian gentleman and a Christian lady, where that we know how to handle ourselves. Not only ethics in this area, but ethics is more than just an important sounding word. It's a practice of our very life. I've found that the Lord has incorporated a carefulness into other areas of my life. For instance, when we go to the grocery store, I don't like it when somebody has left a grocery cart out and it's setting on an incline. That down in West Virginia we do have inclines, and someone has set that there, and they've gone their way, and then I've pulled in, and all of a sudden the wind gets a hold of that cart or something, and it comes rolling down through the parking lot, and all of a sudden, wham, into my car. It never made me feel very nice. I didn't get blessed over my car getting all scratched up because someone was too lazy after they had emptied their grocery cart to take it back where it was supposed to be. So little things like this in different areas of our lives, that the Lord will bring a carefulness to us, an orderliness to us, and will teach us to be mannerly and ethical. The golden rule is more than just something that you memorize and that you recite, but the golden rule is something that you actually live. And if I don't want someone else leaving grocery carts out where that I can't pull into the parking place, or I get my car banged up by one of them, then I'm not to leave my grocery cart out there. Even if it is a ways back to the store, even if it is a distance to get it back in there where it belongs. Amen. You wish I'd stayed on the Battle of the Bulge, don't you? But we're going. Better is little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure and trouble therewith. Better is a dinner of herbs where love is than a stalled ox and hatred therewith. As I began to study that, I thought, poor old Solomon. No wonder the wise man incorporates throughout these Proverbs. No wonder he has statement after statement. Well, he said it's better to live in a tight place on a wall than in a fine home. Better to live up on that wall in a little place where there's love is than to be in that nice big spacious place with a contentious woman. Said there's two things that'll drive a man outside real quick: a nagging wife and a smoking stove. Said those two things will get the job done. And on Solomon brings things in. And I just kind of figure that with 300 wives, he was a pro on what would drive him outdoors, what drove him up a wall, what troubled him the most. And I can see him after some of those troublesome times thinking, oh, here I am when it takes 20 oxen, 10 fat oxen, 100 sheep, and all those other things just for one day. But I'd rather, if I could just have a little bit of happiness, I'd rather have just a little bit of happiness and have nothing but a vegetable meal than I would to have all of the steaks and all the roasts and all the other, and there be so much contention. Solomon's testimony leaks out in those verses. And he makes the statement then, he said, it's better to, he said, if you're a man that's given to appetite, he said, put the knife to your throat. That's discipline, isn't it? You don't believe it says that? 23rd chapter, 2nd verse. Read it for yourself. Put the knife to thy throat if thou be a man given to appetite. While we're on this, and we're thinking about bulges and so forth, put the scissors to your credit cards if you're given to charging. It's one of the tragic things in America right now. Recent statistics point out that the average young couple from age 25 to 35 are spending $397 more each month than what they're bringing in. That is deficit spending. How are they doing it? With their charge card. If you're given to spending, you need to cut those credit cards up. They will be the ruination of you. I remember I was in the bank when Bank AmeriCard and MasterCharge first came out. Bank AmeriCard's been changed to Visa now in most parts of the country. And to get those out into the hands of the people, we did the bank did, I didn't do it. The bank sent them out to everyone who had a certain amount in a savings account. And if they had a decent checking account, they sent them one also, just mass mailing. And so naturally, those cards, those charge cards, got into a lot of hands of people that didn't really know how to handle them. It wasn't too long until the IGA man came in. In fact, just 3 or 4 days after we had sent them out, one of the IGA supermarket managers came in, and he had signed up for it, and he said, boy, people are coming in charging their groceries like mad. They said, boy, we are really enjoying this. And people started going out, and they were buying sets of tires for their cars, and they were just buying wardrobes, and just buying, and just charging it all. I had the misfortune of moving to one place, and a fellow was there who was one of these who was so reckless and didn't know how to handle credit, didn't know how to handle anything like that. And he said, the only thing I know is that anything anybody will give me, I'm going to take it. He said, I'll borrow all the money anybody will allow me to borrow. Now that fellow had been in the ministry at one time, but he had wrecked and ruined his ministry because he just simply couldn't pay his bills. And he got into debt and into deeper debt and on into deeper debt until today he's bordering on bankruptcy and has been flirting with it for some time. Learn that if you want something, begin to save for it. And if you will save for it, it'll be a whole lot more meaningful to you. And when you go in and you buy it and you pay for it and it's yours right then, oh, how good you'll feel. Now, I know this isn't truth that blesses. The old Free Methodist preachers used to preach on 3 things: dirt, debt, and the devil. They said a Christian ought to be clean. And they said a Christian ought to hate the devil and not be close to him. And the third thing is that you ought to stay out of debt. Now, I struggled with that as a boy in Bible school, because when I needed a car, I didn't have the money to just go buy a car. So I had to borrow. But I have been working ever since then, and God has been helping, and God will help. There are scriptural principles of how to handle our finances that we holiness people would be far better off if we would learn to use them. We don't need every gadget and every gimmick that comes down the pike. You don't need the latest in everything. And I found that when I have disciplined myself and said, now, even that set of books that I want so bad, and I've had people that have said, go ahead and get them. I'll loan you the money. You can borrow it from me and pay it back to me just any time you want to. And oh, that's tempting, because I'd love to have that set of books. But do you know what? As the Lord has instructed me and has helped me to discipline myself, and I've just waited until I had the money, and then I got those books, how much more I appreciated them. And after I had gone through that, I've even found some sets of books that I thought I wanted so bad, but after I had saved and scraped and worked so hard, I looked at them again and I thought, you know, I guess I really didn't need those so bad after all. There's another that I'd rather have. It'll give us wisdom rather than just being buyers. It'll give us wisdom, and we'll learn to make proper and correct choices. Another reason that I get into this area of credit buying, of charging, of overspending, of living beyond your means, is because I could take you to Cincinnati this afternoon, and I could take you there because that's where I went to school. I'm certain that other schools that have been in operation any length of time those same cities and areas are actually littered with young men and women that one time went to that area to prepare for God's work. I'm thinking of one fellow who was already in school and was almost out of school when I even went to Cincinnati. And do you know that this afternoon he is still in Cincinnati? I've been gone since 1968. I graduated then. He is still there. And in fact, when I left Cincinnati, he got my job that I left behind at the place where I was employed. He was in debt. He was still buying. He had never learned to control his finances. He has yet to learn to this day. He's still there. He's still working. He's an older man than myself, and yet testified that God's call was upon him. And yet, because of misusing his financial resources, he still has yet to answer God's call for his life. Young people, in this day of tremendous inflation, and when our economy is going wild, and pressures are on, if there was ever a day that you needed to learn to tighten your belt, ask God for wisdom to help you. He will. Finally, he that hath no rule over his own spirit is like a city that is broken down without walls. He that hath no rule over his own spirit is like a city that's broken down without walls. Now I can talk to you like this because I came up as a poor boy. I didn't have much money. And when I first started earning money, I didn't really know how to handle it. I knew that you tithed, I knew that you gave an offering, but I was actually careless with the rest of it. Not to just waste it or throw it away, but still to just spend it and not use it wisely and properly. And while you're young in life, you need to adapt the financial principles of God's Word and ask Him for help. And whenever you receive a paycheck, kneel down and ask God for wisdom in what you do with it. He'll teach you. He'll instruct you. The reason I've talked to you this way today, these are practical areas, is because God expects, He wants, and He deserves to have fruit from your life, in every area of your life. In the Gospel of Luke, the 13th chapter, the owner of a vineyard came and he expected to find fruit, but he found none. The husbandman said, "Wait, let me dig around it, let me fertilize it, let me work with it, and then if it doesn't produce fruit this year, then next year we'll cut it down like you want to." The Amplified has an interesting thing that it renders that. It says three things about that tree in "Why cumbereth it the ground?" And it says, why is it depleting the soil? Why is it taking from the soil, from those things around it that could be growing, but there that tree is depleting the soil. It's not only depleting the soil, but it's intercepting the sun. It's keeping the sun off of the other things that would grow and produce. And then it's taking up room. That's cumbering the ground. Depleting the soil. Taking up room. Intercepting the sun from the others that would grow and profit by it. I pray that God will not allow one of us to have an indictment brought against us by God Himself, that we're just cumbering the ground, we're just cumbering the church. These are real battles, young folks, that we're all fighting. That you need to learn discipline, and you need to take determination and be diligent in the fact that you're going to be all out for God. That you are going to discipline yourself, and you will be spiritual, and you will be godly. And these three battles of the bunk, and of the blab, and of the bulge, there'll be battles that go down in your history as victories because of God's grace and of God's help. Let's stand, please.